the Harris Football Podcast with your host, Christopher Harris.
Welcome. Yeah. Welcome in. I am Chris Harris. This is the Harris Football Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. You people just keep amazing me. Okay, so what I'm about to play you isn't exactly hilarious, but it's also a listener named Nolan Falcon actually playing guitar and singing at the same time, which, okay, I can do that when I'm just strumming chords, but this is Cat Stevens, and it has hard parts.
Now that I've heard the latest injury news, they say I've gotta start someone new. But it's breaking my heart, your hamstring. It ain't worth a damn thing. But if you wanna play, take good care. I hope you make a lot of big plays out there. But you'll be on my bench everywhere. Ooh, fantasy is a cruel world. It's hard to get by with your best guys on the pine. Ooh, fantasy is a cruel world. I'll always remember you every time I hurl.
Pretty fun and awesome. Yeah? Someone on Twitter yesterday mentioned that I should give a hat tip to Nigel and Gary Braun of the Tony Kornheiser show, and they're right. In fact, when people started sending me their recordings of Flexual Healing, I literally was like, hey, do you ever listen to the song parodies on the Tony Kornheiser show? So there you go. Credit where it's due to the intrepid listeners of Mr. Tony's show, too. And thank you, Nolan Falcon. And if you feel like expressing yourself, send those songs to heyharris@harrisfootball.com.
Today's kickoff.
It's rankings day here on the podcast. My week 4 ranks are up and live on harrisfootball.com, and I'll talk about them and answer your burning questions. We haven't had a voicemail from Sunk by a Hug recently, so we'll rectify that. And I also have a non-football related song for you that I really love. And then Scott Pianowski of Yahoo Fantasy is going to be on the show, and we're going to do some comparisons of our Week 4 ranks and talk about some guys where maybe we slightly disagree. We're brought to you today by the good folks at SeatGeek. They have the best way to get tickets for any sporting event. SeatGeek does things that other online ticketing sites don't. It pulls in ticket options from hundreds of online sellers, so when you shop on SeatGeek, you're seeing virtually every ticket option available for that game all on one page. They have this cool thing called Deal Score. It ranks every ticket on the market with a 1 to 100 value score, so you can easily identify the best ticket values in the building. And SeatGeek's mobile app makes the ticket buying process seamless and easy. Once you find a ticket you want to buy, 2 taps, and you got it. So download the free SeatGeek app right now. Inside the app, enter the promo code Harris, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Every ticket purchased on SeatGeek is backed by a 100% guarantee. So download the free SeatGeek app and enter promo code Harris.
It's time for Rankings Talk.
Indeed it is, Amber. Let me dig in for a few minutes about what the mechanics of rankings were like in Week 4. We're used to running back being an ugly position after the first few guys, but, man, quarterback, kinda ugly. No Brady this week, no Romo, no Big Ben. I have Andy Dalton, 8. I have Tyrod Taylor, 11, and Derek Carr, 12. I have Colin Kaepernick, 13, and he just threw another pick 6 since I started this sentence. But what can you do? Which of the other guys do you really trust? Ryan Tannehill? He's played 1 competent game out of the 3. Sam Bradford? Remember the fun old days 2 weeks ago when people were mad at me for not ranking Sam Bradford higher? Matthew Stafford in Seattle? Michael Vick? Brandon Whedon? I think if you're filling in for Romo or Big Ben, the guys this week are Dalton, Taylor and Carr. I have them close, but in that order. At running back, there are some obvious key moving parts. When you do these ranks on a Tuesday night, you have to make big swings, big guesses about who might play and who might not, and then change as news comes clearer, even though, as Chris Ivory proved last week, it's never 100% clear. So really, I don't know anything more than you do. I'm reading the same stuff everyone else reads, which is probably to some degree misinformation, but you have to start somewhere. So I have Arian Foster, Chris Ivory, DeMarco Murray, and Andre Ellington playing, and I have Marshawn Lynch, LaShawn McCoy, and Tevin Coleman not playing. But who knows? I know what you really want from me, from anyone, is a strict thumbs up, thumbs down this very second, but, it's not that way in the NFL anymore. You have to have contingencies, and you have to be flexible. Among the receivers, I assumed Alshon Jeffrey would be back, and I took a stab on Deshaun Jackson being back too, but I didn't rank him as if his long speed is perfect. Victor Cruz, I put him back in too. Devontae Adams, Sammy Watkins, and Eric Decker I left out for the time being. And Charles Johnson isn't ranked, but I couldn't swear to you that's entirely because of his rib injury. At tight end, I took a shot on Julius Thomas being back, but we really won't know anything for a while. And I have Dwayne Allen, Crockett Gilmore, Ladarius Green, and Jacob Tamme all out. And yes, I know there are hundreds and hundreds of people who just heard the names I said but weren't listening to anything else, and now you're going to tweet to me and say, "You fool, I thought you said Andre Ellington is playing." When in fact, what I'm telling you is, I don't know, but you're not listening anymore, are you? We're also brought to you today by DraftKings, and I think something that gets lost in all the hype over daily fantasy sports is that DraftKings exists to give you a whole bunch of different kinds of fun ways to play. You hear a lot of stories about their Millionaire Maker contests, and it's true, DraftKings will literally make a new millionaire every week. Obviously, there's a rush in playing that kind of contest. You're competing against thousands of people, but if you come out on top, the rewards are huge. And there are also smaller contests on DraftKings where you're competing against fewer people, it feels a little less random, and you can still win cash. Either way you prefer to play, you're picking from the entire universe of NFL players every week, so you're not locked into the guys you drafted this summer. I play every week, admittedly for low stakes, and I genuinely have a great time with it. And DraftKings is pretty sure you will too, because when you start a new account at DraftKings.com and use the promo code Harris, they'll give you a free game to try it out. So do it now. Get a free game. Go to DraftKings.com and use promo code Harris. So let's dig into some of the most common questions that you all asked me Tuesday evening when my Week 4 ranks came out, and see if we can figure out what to do with some of the key guys, the problematic guys this week, both in commissioner style and in DFS. Joe asked on Twitter, following me at Harris Football, saw you have Foster at 7. Is he definitely playing? So I just bring up Joe's tweet as representative of all the injury guys, as I just mentioned. I'm making educated guesses. It's always reading tea leaves. I hope the Chris Ivory debacle from this past week is helping convince you that we really don't know anything, even when players are declared active, apparently. There are so many folks out there who hear an ESPN or NFL Network reporter say something, Darrelle Revis is going to shadow Jordan Matthews all over the field, and take it on total faith. Obviously, you have to try and educate yourself and take hints and do your best, but in the end, we're all guessing, even the people who say they aren't guessing. On Facebook, Craig Martin asks, what's the rationale for the running back teammates that you have ranked right next to each other? Murray Matthews, Morris Jones, Anderson Hillman, Bell Abdullah. The rationale, Craig, is that I am a total wimp and fraud. And I'm kind of serious about that. I mean, these are situations that seem entirely fluid to me. They seem like splits and committees and whatever else you want to call them. And I am splitting the baby, my friend. let's take each situation separately. The Eagles' backfield. As I already mentioned, I've made an assumption about Murray based on the fact that he was a surprise inactive for Week 3. That maybe that means his hamstring will be ready to go. But as I say over and over, usage is something nobody can really be sure about. The Eagles presumably know what their plans are now that the run game showed life behind Ryan Matthews. Maybe they view him as their starter now. Maybe they'll just decide, yeah, we figured some stuff out. Let's go back to DeMarco as our guy. Or maybe it's a split. It's worth noting that when I put ranks together, I'm not trying to predict the week's final fantasy points. Right? I'm not trying to give you what the final fantasy point or order will be. Which is why sites that rank experts' results are a little bit dubious, because that's the basis on which they are grading your prediction savvy. Instead, what I'm trying to do is tell you the order in which I would start players. And my feeling is that if Murray goes, I would feel about equal in starting those two guys. And since in my standard running back ranks, they're 21st and 22nd, I'm cautiously optimistic on both of them. For Washington's backs, I've seen a split, so again, that's the level where I'd feel comfortable. Acknowledging Matt Jones has showed acceleration, Alfred Morris probably doesn't have, but also acknowledging that game flow can be Morris's friend, and in weeks 1 and 2, he had some rumbling, powerful runs himself. The Broncos runners, now I'm feeling less confident because I haven't seen success really from any of them. And the Lions, they're traveling to Seattle. Both guys scored touchdowns last week, but both got stuffed on most of their carries. So again, that's my confidence level for each one of them. Really good question, though. And yes, I was kind of being a fraud with those ranks. Chris Losey on Twitter asks, where does Marshawn fit if he's a full go? Well, the Seahawks play Monday night, and I think the most likely scenario is a whole lot of questionable right up until Monday evening. But I'll take Chris's supposition for a moment at face value. If we could somehow have all our worry assuaged
eye roll
before the weekend, Lynch would be a definite top 10 running back. And as I talked about yesterday with J.J. Zacharyson, I view Lynch as a definite buy low candidate, but we have to face facts. Given the way the NFL works these days, it's highly unlikely we're going to have a ton of clarity on Lynch. Plus, even though Thomas Rawls played pretty well Sunday, we don't really know that he'd be the starter in Lynch's absence. Yes, if you wanted to wait for the Seattle running backs, the strategy I'd follow would be to add Rawls and use him if Lynch is inactive. But Fred Jackson's the veteran. It wouldn't be the first time we saw a team default to their veteran backup rather than use the undrafted rookie once they had a chance to really think about it. Colin Elliott sent us an email, heyharris@harrisfootball.com, asking, how bullish are you on Devontae Freeman? I was just offered Chris Ivory and Drew Brees for him. I was the Romo owner, so I am currently streaming. On the surface, I love the deal, but I see a script where Freeman is the lead back now in a prolific offense. Thoughts? So on the specific of Colin's trade question, I think I make that trade. Of course, the reason we don't tend to go too deeply into the specifics of trade questions on our show is that it's super useful for exactly one person and literally nobody else. I've always found trade questions on these kinds of arrangements to be hugely boring, so I stay away from them here. So instead, it's a good question because I like Freeman, so I wanted to use Colin's email as a launching point to talk about Freeman in general. I mentioned on Monday's podcast that his tape was good. The Falcons made an obvious early effort to get him to the perimeter quickly. It went so well, and the Cowboys seemed so helpless against him that later in the game, the Falcons just started running straight-ahead trap plays for him. And I think it was his third touchdown. He wasn't touched right up the middle. It was the kind of performance that certainly could get him a spot ahead of Tevin Coleman when Coleman comes back. But I'm skeptical it's going to stay, a full-time kind of job. I think the Cowboys played a really poor defensive game and the snowball started rolling downhill. And a player Freeman's size, is best suited as a platoon guy, especially when you have a rookie there who you invested in and who showed really well in a game and a half's worth of tape. So yeah, Freeman's usable this week against the Texans, but Coleman is going to come back. I think he'll be involved heavily, and if you can cash in on Freeman right now, I think you're selling quite high, and I like it. Minnie asks on Twitter, why so high on Jonathan Stewart? Sauce Castillo, also on Twitter, concerned with Stu Beef's lack of production in a plus matchup? Anything on game tapes that suggests declining skill set? And Skills 711, I'd love to hear some more depth on your J. Stu ranking. Good matchup, sure, but wasn't New Orleans supposed to be too? Hashtag daily no-show. Owie. Okay, so Stewart was probably the most asked about player from this week's ranks. These were just 3 of many tweets. So I launched NFL Game Rewind again and watched the coach's tape, which is available now, on Stewart from the Saints game in Week 3. And in particular, that end zone camera just shows you a lot, pretty much everything you need to know when it comes to the running game. Putting aside any bias I may feel in favor of Stewart, whom I've praised in the past, what I'll say is, I don't see anything about a declining skill set. No. The size, obviously still there. And when he gets decisive, his acceleration is still legit. My criticism from this game in particular would be that on occasion, when his blocking wasn't just right and there was a hint of trouble at the second level of the defense, Stewart's instinct didn't seem to be to barrel ahead forward and then cut hard, but rather to extend a play by being overpatient or even, dare I say, do the Bryce Brown bounce outside unnecessarily, which I didn't love. I think that he will look back at this tape this week, before Week 4, and think that he was a little over-dancy, that he may have left some yards out there on the field. But this isn't really a condemnation. I still think he's quite a good runner, and for as much as we always have to worry about the Panthers running backs getting their fair share of touchdowns with Cam Newton around, I still feel pretty confident that Stewart is locked in as an RB2 for fantasy. Realize, of course, that an RB2 in this world that we're currently living in is, kind of a borderline unreliable player. They all have warts. Jeffrey Morton asks on Twitter, with Andrew Luck playing so poorly, why rank him as your number 2 quarterback? Well, I get it, Jeffrey. Luck hasn't played great. He had 2 tough defenses to go against in the first 2 weeks of the season, but he didn't lay down great tape Week 3 against the Titans either. He made mistakes. His supposedly great plays, his big chunk plays, were underthrown and his receiver saved him. But I do think this comes down to personal philosophy. If you've ever asked yourself a question like this, like Jeffrey has done, which is a totally legit question, I recommend you sit down with a pencil and paper and list all the quarterbacks playing in Week 4 and put them in the order you'd recommend folks starting them. I'm just not going to have Andy Dalton ahead of Andrew Luck, even though he's scored a bunch more fantasy points so far this year. And I would say, just on the merits of their tape so far this year, Dalton's been better. So here's where I guess you could say that it's not only about this week's game tape, because if it was, Derek Carr would even be higher in my ranks. It's also about the tape I've watched week after week after week the past few years when Luck has played really well, and my supposition that he'll figure it out, and when he does and puts up the big game I think is coming soon, I don't want him on my bench while I'm dallying with Tyrod Taylor. That does not mean I'm 100% going to be right for this week. If your personal philosophy is more about, heck, I gave Luck his chance for 3 whole weeks, and I'm dissatisfied, I don't care if he goes off on my bench, then, you got to do what you got to do. I know for my part, I'll keep playing a guy like Luck, and I'll keep playing most guys who've been studs in the past as long as their playing time isn't an issue, assuming that he'll progress to the mean. All right, let's do a little rapid fire and get through some more of the issues that were vexing many of you. David Hastings says, Gio Bernard above Jeremy Hill? Is this recency bias, or are you predicting game flow? Both of those things are negative. David, I can't believe you'd accuse me of either one. Actually, it's not true. In my standard ranks, I have Hill like 4 or 5 spots ahead of Gio Bernard, and in my PPR ranks, I have Bernard ahead of Hill. You're obviously looking at those. Listen, kind of a split job now. It's not so much recency bias as workload, and boy, last week for the Bengals, Hill was out there about 15 snaps. That's not good, so there's some game flow dependency. I'm not predicting game flow, but I am saying Gio Bernard has out-caught Jeremy Hill so far this year 12-1, so that's where I come down on the PPR ranks. Eric Belair says, surprised how high you are on Witten. I hope he ends up as the number 4 tight end this week. Yeah, the problem is, Eric, look at the tight end position. I'll take the guy who gets a bunch of targets. It's Brandon Weeden, so I'm not super excited about his prospect, but it's like Jordan Cameron has to be a top 10 tight end, and he didn't do anything last week either, and he's really only had a few big catches. So just kind of a crummy position. I'll take the guy who I think the volume will be high on. Mike says, "Hey, you're missing Ty Montgomery from your ranks." No, I'm not. I'm aware of his existence. He is the number 3 for as long as Davante Adams is out, and I did mention early in the show that I am predicting, for whatever that's worth, that Davante Adams could miss this week. I'm willing to have Montgomery prove that he belongs as a viable fantasy threat. We've certainly seen Aaron Rodgers have 3 receivers be viable in the past, and San Francisco wouldn't appear to be a terrible matchup for Green Bay's offense. Montgomery wasn't a high-volume player in that game on Monday night, but he scored a touchdown, so I may wind up looking bad for not ranking him high. I just want to sort of see it as a regular occurrence. And Paul Hutner asks, and several people asked this. This was maybe the 3rd most asked about question on my spreadsheet here. After the last 2 weeks, surprised you have the Dolphins defense so high. Is it matchup, or do you think they truly right the ship? I had to go look at my ranks, and do I have them high? I'm like, oh, wait, they're 12. I don't think the problem has primarily been about the defense with Miami. I think the problem has been the offense. That's a really uncreative scheme, a quarterback who's not played well in 2 of 3 games. And, Ndamukong Suh gets a lot of negative attention just because people won't like him. I think he's playing all right. I don't think the Jets are a great offensive team, and I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is an potential interception machine, so I don't view it as a negative matchup. And again, I don't see a huge downside in playing them, but I also don't think they're a top 10 defense, so I think I'm okay with that.
Time for the mailbag.
Hello there. My name is Dan Plainview, and I'm calling with my boy, H.W. I'd like to report some suspicious activities I saw when I was seeing about a drilling operation down in Little Boston. I spotted a man proclaiming his love for the Patriots, wearing a nightgown that had feet stitched on. He asked me he might see some of my land to plant his flag players. I told him I was an oil man and not interested in his fantasy football. He told me that was a crutch argument and that I'd abandon my child just as he's abandoned his love for Doug Martin year after year. I know it's you, Christopher Harris, but I want to tell you I'm a fan of Alex Smith, regardless of his dink and dunk offense. I dink your rankings, Christopher, you boy. I dink it up!
I was just going to leave that unexplained, but then I realized maybe there are some people who haven't seen There Will Be Blood. And for shame, you should really rent There Will Be Blood. That is a very good Daniel Day-Lewis impersonation. Daniel Plainview.
I drink it up! Don't bully me, Daniel!
Yeah. Don't bully me, Daniel.
Harris's music digression.
Today's proper digression comes from a Pennsylvania band called the Menzingers. Kind of a power punk pop outfit. Their most recent record is called Rented World. Really good. I think may have come out at the end of last year. Anyway, love this song. Hope you'll consider downloading some music by the Menzingers. Thank you very much to them for their permission. This song is called Bad Things.
Today's guest.
And today's guest, it's a good one. He's been my buddy on Twitter for a long, long time. You know him, you love him. About 27,000 of you follow him on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski. Scott Pianowski. Thank you so much for being here, man.
My pleasure. As I told you right before we started, I salute you. The idea of going from a big company to a small company and forming your own product, and you've already gotten quite a bit of following and strong reviews. So I'm rooting for you, and I'm happy just to talk to you today.
Well, thanks for being here, and you're aboard because you're a ranker like me. And
I'm rank all right.
You're rank all right. And this is the Week 4 Ranks podcast, and I've spent some time earlier in the show addressing some of the question guys for the week and just perusing our respective ranks. Obviously, we have lots of similarities, but I usually on these Wednesday shows tend to pick out stuff that's different, not because I think you're wrong and I'm right, but more because I'm interested in your opinion, and you're a really smart guy, and you've been doing this for a long time. And so I thought maybe we would talk about some of those guys. But even before we get to that, this is sort of my standard question for guests over the past couple weeks. I wonder if, and this is sort of unscripted, but I'm just going to ask you, I wonder if there are any of these struggling running backs, these, I don't know, well, DeMarco Murray not even struggling, right, didn't even play last week, but the C.J. Andersons and the Jeremy Hills and the Justin Forsetts. I wonder, in general, is your advice on those players, you know, any of them are you buying low? Like, or any of them, do you feel good enough about their bounce back possibilities that you're like, yeah, I think I would give something pretty legit to get one of these struggling running backs?
I feel like we're going to get one of them, and maybe even two of them are going to bounce back really well, and I wish I had a very strong take of who those guys were going to be. I think you can build a case for all three of them. In the case of Hill, I think he's the most talented, and I wonder if Cincinnati may have gotten in his head a little bit too much about the fumbles. We had that game where he fumbled twice and he got benched, and you know the NFL treats fumbles now. They just treat these guys like they're lepers, and you get off my football field. Now, Sigmund Bloom, a mutual friend of ours, was talking about reviewing some of the tape and thinking that Hill might be running tentatively. I think you see that a lot. I remember when Stephen Ridley had a fumbling bit in New England, and we know how Belichick reacts to that, even more so than most coaches. And then Ridley would get on the field for a while, and you could just see it. I mean, he'd have his hands covering the ball, but it just seemed like that's all he was thinking of. In football, it has to be a game of reaction on game day. You can't be thinking on the field. All your thinking and all your preparation has to be done ahead of time, and then it has to be reaction, and you can't play mechanically. I just wonder if that's part of the problem with Hill. He was too good last year for too long of a time. He came into the league with a pedigree. Looks like this is going to be a winning team, so there's going to be a lot of favorable game script where they want to pound away with a back like Hill. Gio Bernard's a talented player, but he's good at different things as opposed to Hill. I think the Bengals have a very good setup for Hill once he just kind of gets his head on straight. So he'd be the one I would get the first guy I would get. In the case of Anderson, a player who I believe in, I know he only did it for half a year, but he was too good in that sample for me to throw it away. And I'm just blown up. I don't know if you've thought about these terms. I tweeted about a couple days ago. I can't remember a time in the NFL where as many teams as I respected, who I thought were legitimate contenders to go to the Super Bowl, had offensive lines that I couldn't stand. Yeah. I think Denver has a lot of problems on their offensive line. Seattle has a lot of problems on their offensive line. I'm not sure how good Indianapolis is, but they have a lot of problems on their offensive line. I thought Philadelphia was going to be a great team, and they still may be at some point, but their offensive line seems like it's in a state of flux. In the case of the Broncos, 4 new starters on the offensive line, a 5th player who switched positions on the offensive line. If Gary Kubiak is the running game guru that he's made out to be, he'll somehow coach these guys up and find a formula that works. I mean, I hate to try to chase outliers from previous examples, but we do have to at least mention that the Patriots last year, for a month, could not block anybody, could not get in any defense's way. Miami just abused them in the first week. Kansas City on national TV in the 4th week. The Raiders should have beaten them in the 3rd week, and they won week 2 because Matt Castle, I guess, owed Belichick a past favor and threw like 17 interceptions. But the Patriots, and granted, like, that's an outlier example. It's not like teams are going to radically change that much, but I just got to believe that Denver, on some level, is going to solve its offensive line problem. And they see Ronnie Hillman as a secondary player. They don't want him to be their featured back. And I still think Anderson has a decent chance to be, if not a running back one, somebody you can play every week and feel good about. The player I'm most worried about is Forsett. Now, in the positives with Forsett, I don't see an obvious guy chasing him. Buck Allen hasn't really impressed me, and Taliaferro I still think is kind of a straight line guy, but he's been hurt mostly, and that's kind of holding him back. So I think Forsett has the least amount of competition, where the Broncos could use Hillman, I guess, 10 to 15 touches a game, and certainly Cincinnati has a good back in Bernard, even if he isn't made out to be a bell cow. But Forsett, he's just such a weird player. He came into the league and was a satellite player for such a long time. Nobody was ever thinking he would be a featured runner. Too small, too frail, and he has this one great season. Now they're, again, another team where their offensive line looks terrible right now. Also, their defense looks awful. It looks like they might be getting in a lot of shootouts, which may hurt the game script for Forsett. So I guess because of his age and because of maybe the situation in Baltimore, I like Forsett the least, although he's also probably being contested by the least amount on the depth chart behind him.
And you might have to give up the least to get him. Interesting. Good perspective. We're not necessarily talking about giving up, your best receiver for one of these guys, but interesting perspective. Let's talk about week 4 and some players on whom our initial ranks. I mean, we should emphasize that, when we're ranking on Tuesday, we don't know anything, right? I spent a lot of the show already talking about this. People get upset, and then, we start getting news, and usually it's a lie anyway, but we try to incorporate the news that the NFL teams are handing us, and then we try to come up with some picture of what we think the lay of the land is by the weekend. Let's start out with what folks should do if Arian Foster winds up being active. And we've been teased now for a couple weeks in a row. In the end, my supposition is, maybe they're just going to keep him hanging on the sideline. But let's just say he winds up active on game day. I rated him as a top 10 play in such a case, and you were hedging a little bit more. You can explain why, but you had him outside your top 20. Tell me where your Foster rank at least begins for the week.
Well, you did hit on a lot of the key points, just in the initial, in the macro, where we have to go through the injury week, and we have to try to read between the lines with what teams tell us. And NFL teams have no incentive to tell us the truth.
That is true.
There are some teams that are actually pretty honest. I've felt over the years that Mike Tomlin, for whatever reason, seems to be pretty straightforward with his disclosures with the Steelers. I don't know why that is. And maybe some Pittsburgh fans are listening and shaking their heads saying, no, he lies all the time. But it seems like every time I've needed injury news from the Steelers, I feel like Tomlin is at least trying to be straight with the media. And I don't know why that is, where there are teams where you almost get the idea they're intentionally misleading us. And then you have funny situations where the Jets dressed Chris Ivory last week and they don't even use him. So there might have been some poor souls who were suckered into playing Ivory. Maybe they were desperate, but they thought, okay, well, if he's in uniform, he must be healthy. He must be ready for something, and they don't play him at all. But so my rankings, it's certainly, to be honest with you, we put them out on Tuesday, but if they allowed me to put my initial ranks out on Wednesday or Thursday, I would, because I just think the practice week is that important, especially for a guy like Foster who hasn't played the full season, and that sounds like it's probably going to be a game time decision. I think an experienced player like Foster, I'd be more likely to be, I don't know, just more, let's compare him to, say, Todd Gurley. I was very reluctant to rank Gurley optimistically last week. It was his first game. I thought the Rams had other options on offense they could use, at least as placeholder options. I just didn't see they were going to throw Gurley out for 15 or 20 touches no matter what the game situation was. And that was a close game. It's not like the Rams fell out of contention and Gurley became irrelevant. Just they decided he wasn't that effective with a limited amount of touches. They decided not to overdo it. I could imagine a situation where Foster could play and the Texans might feel like, okay, we gave him a couple months. He's healthy now. He's good to go. Here's 15 or 20 touches. I think Foster has a chance to be that guy. So if I like the tea leaves that I read, and again, it's an inexact science and we're going to have to guess on a lot of this stuff. But if I feel that if Foster's on the field, I do think Houston will have him around 15 touches, which would make him a viable RB2.
All right, so if Arian Foster, if you like the tea leaves and you get to the weekend and it's feeling to you like he's going to play, is he going higher than 22 in your ranks? Where would he go?
Yeah, he would probably be somewhere right in the middle of the RB2 range, so maybe 15 to 18, somewhere in there.
All right, I have him higher, but for many of the reasons that you say, but I understand that it's a dangerous game, and we've had enough guys burn us here just in these past couple of weeks with being healthy but not healthy, Marshawn Lynching us, and then not Marshawn Lynching us, that I totally get it. I totally get why you'd be a little more skeptical than I. I know that the Drew Brees rank that you have is also related to injury, so let's get that out of the way. You have Brees 18th among quarterbacks. I have him 6th. I don't want to read anything into when players say they're optimistic. Oh, my God. I mean, he's the last person we're going to ask. Let's just fast forward through, again, like our initial rankings are kind of going to be hampered by what we know. But do you have concerns about Brees, even if you're convinced by the weekend that he is going to play, that would keep him far outside of your top 10?
First of all, you hit on a really key point, that the worst source of any injury timetable is the player himself.
It really is.
These guys, you have to keep in mind that these guys are supermen their whole lives. They're the best player in their Pop Warner team and their high school team, and they're stars in college in most cases. And they're used to overcoming challenges. They're used to somebody saying, here's expectations we have for you, and they surpass it. And here's how many times we think you can bench this amount of weight, and they surpass it. And they're just used to exceeding what's expected and just being of so high the top percentile in so many areas that when they get hurt, of course they think, well, hey, I'm Superman. I'm just going to bounce back and brush it off, and it's not going to be a big deal. Also, no player, I think at the moment you go in the NFL, you hear your biological clock ticking, you're not going to play that long in most cases. So the last thing you want to do is give your team any incentive to think that they can't rely on you, that they need to replace you, that they need to find the guy who's going to take your spot. And I think a lot of guys are just paranoid of losing their position in line. And I hope Yahoo hasn't replaced me in the time that we did this podcast. So, yes, the players are the worst sources. They're all going to be overly optimistic. And I think that's the problem with fantasy sometimes, is that the fantasy owners want to believe that guys are coming. Giancarlo Stanton gets hurt in the middle of a baseball season. Okay, well, he'll be back, what did he say, 6 to 8 weeks? That sounds like 6 weeks to me. Well, 3 months later, he still hasn't played. But in the case of Brees, what worries me is the last time he played football, he didn't play well. And then in this Sunday game, it's a Sunday night game. And so I know usually we have clarity at quarterback more quickly than other positions because it's just so much infrastructure of the offense is tied to the quarterback. It's harder for a team to play possum and treat quarterback like a game time decision where they can easily do that at other positions. But because it's a Sunday night game, I mean, at least with Foster, he's a 1:00 game on Sunday, so you're probably going to have a sense of what's going on then, with much lead time to make changes or even a late pickup if you need to. I'm just worried with Brees that if it does drag into Sunday, then you have to wait out. Then you have to hope that you have a caddy that plays in one of the last 2 games of the week.
Well, let's just say you believe it. You believe he's going to play for whatever reason. We've convinced ourselves he's going to play. How high does he go in your ranks?
Outside of the starting line, that quarterback 1 line, if you want to say it's a top 10, top 12, top 14, I do not feel comfortable having him because the offense, I'm still waiting for Brandon Cooks to happen. Marcus Colston, I'm convinced, is 47 years old. Some weeks they throw to their back, some weeks they don't. They get C.J. Spiller back. They're hardly using him. This offense, and I'll get it, it's the funniest thing is that the 1 week the offense actually looked good for a while was the week with Luke McCown. I wonder if maybe Brees has just been playing hurt the whole year and they felt they've had to mask it to some degree. I know Cooks was open a couple of weeks ago for some throws that Brees missed, but I'm just trying to wean myself off of believing that New Orleans can do whatever they want on offense. And it used to be the book used to be that they just show up at home and blow teams out. And now they've lost 6 games in a row, and that script doesn't exist anymore. But I'm just trying to not look at Peyton and Brees and just think, okay, anytime they want to step on the field and score 35 points, they're going to do it. I
literally was going to follow up your comment with we sort of have to change our minds sometimes about offenses. Denver and New Orleans are not the same offenses that we remember. So the idea that their players are automatics to bounce back, I mean, they don't look like the same attacks. So I'm with you there, but I have to say, watching the Falcons march it up and down against the Cowboys. I just think if Drew Brees plays, I'm playing him.
Yeah, although I know part of that was Freeman, but I just feel like comparing anything Julio Jones does to a defense to anything the Saints have right now, to me, that doesn't compute. By the way, one quick thing I want to mention about the Broncos, that I know it's frustrating as the running game has been, and obviously Manning has been a little bit more difficult to trust, although in the shotgun and in the pistol he seems a lot more comfortable. One thing I love about this Broncos offense is they basically throw it to two guys. They throw it to Demaryius Thomas. They throw it to Emmanuel Sanders. And one of the most beautiful – receiver has so much variance as a position. And when you can ever look at guys on a team and say, okay, that guy's getting 10 to 15 targets today no matter what. They're ahead, they're behind. It doesn't matter who the cornerbacks are, what the coverage is. They're going to throw to these two guys almost exclusively. That makes everybody knew Thomas was going to be good, but I think a lot of people were concerned. And I try to just tune out all the summer talk of teams. They give you their best foot forward of how they want to play, and this talk of, Sanders isn't going to be used that much, and it's going to be a power running game. It's all nice if it works out, if they get the offensive line going, and if their running back doesn't hurt his toe in the first week. But I think Sanders has turned into a guy that he's a top 10 receiver for me now, because I just think his floor is absurdly high, and because he's in a Peyton Manning offense, Peyton Manning's still a good quarterback, if not an elite quarterback, he has a high floor, a high ceiling as well. But it just seems like any week, no matter what the game situation, he's getting 8 to 12 targets.
So you're saying that Cody Latimer, maybe not quite a breakout star?
Man,
we don't even need to go there. I've talked about him so much.
Well, there's another, and I'll admit, there's an off-season story I kind of wanted to believe in, that he didn't know the offense, and he was making strides with Manning and all this stuff, and I guess he doesn't know the offense.
He's 7th on the depth chart.
Sounds like he won't be playing.
No. All right, let's wrap this up with a little Amari Cooper talk.
Sure.
You're in. You have him 6th this week. I was a little more circumspect. I have him 19th. Nothing about the player. It's all about the quarterback. We talked a little about Derek Carr before we even started recording. Tell me how you get to Cooper at number 6.
Yeah, Derek Carr. I was so underwhelmed by him last year, and I was impressed by what he's shown the last 2 weeks. And this is, as you said, we talked about before we started tape. He did get away with some throws in the Baltimore game, and maybe I need to rewatch that tape. And maybe I just want to believe that Oakland has a good offense again. I didn't end up with any Cooper shares because I just thought this Oakland situation could ruin anybody with the team and the culture and the waste in the stadium. I just thought Oakland, they haven't had a winning record since the Super Bowl team of 2002. And it's not like there's a lot of 7-9 seasons in there. I mean, they're going 3-13 or 4-12 almost every season. It's just so nice to see, Tavius Murray looks like a stud. And Cooper, I think, is the most polished receiver we've seen in a generation. I know we just had the best rookie class we're ever going to see, but Cooper looks like he's played football for NFL level for 4 or 5 years to me. Just the way he knows how to set up receivers and how to break off routes and any dynamite after the catch. I could not be more in love with him. And I saw a couple of throws from Carr in the Cleveland game that maybe I'm over extrapolating, that I think that he could be, I'm never going to expect him to be a star, but he could be the 5, 6, 8 year answer in Oakland. So I see an offense that has 3 pieces that I feel good about, certainly Cooper and Murray. And the Raiders defense has yet to stop anybody. I mean, every tight end scores on them, but they're having trouble with all sorts of coverage. So I think Chicago, as bad as they looked last week, you got to give Seattle some of that credit. Plus the timing of the game couldn't have been worse. Chicago's offense should put up some sort of a fight. I think every Oakland game has been high scoring, been kind of a carnival. I expect that carnival again. Cooper looks very safe for 10 plus targets. I have no problem calling him a receiver 1 for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I have a problem only because of Derek Carr. It's nothing to do with him. Actually, in La Liga Lebowski, which I talk about a lot on the show, a dynasty league with super deep rosters, I had the number 1 pick in the rookie draft. I took him over the running backs. I took him. I do own shares big time.
Nice.
It's just Derek Carr. I'm with you. As I said in yesterday's show, the tape on him in week 3 was literally fantastic, wonderful. He didn't make a single mistake. It's the only time I've ever seen that happen in his NFL career. So I have some doubts. But if he is, it's what we said about Blake Bortles in week 2. If he is what he showed in that game, then his weapons are going to be sweet. Allen Robinson's going to be a superstar if Bortles is what he is all the time. What he was in week 2, of course, it turned out as soon as week 3 he wasn't, and that's the concern with Derek Carr. But listen, at least it's in his bag, right? he has the ability to be that good, and if he is, Cooper's going to be a star. Scott, thank you so much for doing this, my friend. It was kind of short notice, and you are a true home run hitter among the fantasy cognoscenti. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Before I get off here, can I ask you one more quick question?
Yeah.
Week 4 of the NFL. Is this the point now where we've seen enough from defenses where we can start to be aggressive about this is a good matchup, this is a bad matchup. Do you feel that we're there yet? Or I'm just curious when that switch kind of flicks for you.
Not quite yet. 3 games isn't enough. And unfortunately, now the stupid bye weeks start.
Yeah.
I have the Harris Index, which is my sort of matchup independent tool that folks can use to try to figure out who the good defensive matchups are, who the bad ones are. And I don't usually, I've promised to people that I'll try to get it going after week 4. Week 5 is usually for me when data starts looking realistic. How about you?
Mm-hmm. 3 to 4 weeks. I think right now, if something looks really strong, I wouldn't. If anything was borderline right now, I would just tend to ignore it. But if I see, and everybody's noticed this, I mean, Oakland has not covered tight ends, not just on the stat sheet, but you watch them and they're safeties. They have guys. They have injuries there. And it's been ordinary guys who are getting them. It's one thing if you're getting Gronk or you're getting Kelsey or you're getting Olsen, but when Gary Barnidge can't be stopped, when Crockett Gilmore, who might be an okay player, can't be stopped, you have a problem there. That's Martellus Bennett was going to be a fantasy starter for most people anyway, but that's, you push him over the cliff. He's a DFS play now and that type of thing. But so on the extremes, I'm willing to consider it, but maybe not globally yet.
Well, it's something to. We know that soon enough the season will progress, and we will have some good data and enough film to feel good about it. People should follow Scott on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski, Pianowski. Hey, thanks so much for doing this.
My pleasure, and keep doing what you're doing. I know people are excited about the product, and I think you're doing great.
And that's our show. Remember, Thursday night, an hour before kickoff, I'll do a live streaming video Q&A and answer your lineup conundrums and give you a chance to play DraftKings against me. Go to harrisfootball.com/videos for more info on Thursday. Thanks again to the Menzingers for letting us use their great song. Thanks to Nolan Falcon for the Cat Stevens tribute. Rock on. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
The Harris Football Podcast's opening theme is Under the Gun by Apex Manor. The end theme is Tooth and Claw by OU Villain. Subscribe to the Harris Football Podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode.